Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. This is a time that we gather to explore Christianity in and for the 21st century. I mean, Christianity in the 21st century, what is it? Which Christianity? It's problematic for many of us. And Christianity for the 21st century, well, who knows? And many of us here wonder if Christianity can speak a word to us in the 21st century, be it wounded or broken or otherwise. I think it can. I have said before that many of us who gather here on Second Saturday are rather haunted by Christianity. I mean, we may not know exactly what we make of it at this point or where we find ourselves in it or outside it, but some of its claims and hopes haunt us. It's been, for many, it's been part of the air that we breathe in our growing up. So here we gather and we wonder and we question together, not worrying about whether or not we're going to get this absolutely right and not worrying about whether or not we're going to go to hell. Our subtext for this year is evolution of the word. All things change. And our angle of vision here on Second Saturday is that, reality with a capital R, if I can say that, is an open system, or let me just say is open. And our preference tends to be toward closed systems, or to use a semi-technical word, towards decidability. Our guest today prefers undecidability. And let me give you a quote from our guest, whom I'll introduce in just a moment, to give you something to think about. It is undecidability that gives decision and life its decisiveness. It's undecidability that gives that. Anyway, our perspective here on Second Saturday, our understanding of word, whether it's biblical or otherwise, is that its meanings change and change over time as we do. All things change. And as our guest today would say, there is no final hermeneutical or interpretive key. There's no final hermeneutical or interpretive key. But that does not mean that just anything goes. So here on Second Saturday, we gather and wonder and reflect. And even though the world is complex and teetering, we're glad to be here. In just a moment, I want to welcome our guest, but Jeff Creswell, a friend and colleague of mine. Jeff and Carol, his wife, do a lot of formation work and group work. Jeff, would you orient us a little bit to, hello, good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
Would you orient us a little bit to the plenary time, some courtesies and just some things to be mindful of?
Sure. First of all, welcome everybody. It's great to see that we have such a nice crowd of folks from all over the world who've come to join us this morning. A few things. When we get to the plenary, the way that we're going to have people interact with Marianne and Jack is that there's a little button at the bottom of your menu bar in Zoom that says reactions. If you click on that, there's an opportunity to raise a hand. A little hand will go up in your video box, and there'll be a queue of you with your hands raised, and I'll be calling on people to ask their question or share their observation with Marianne and Jack. And I'll just say that the order that you see people lined up is not necessarily the order that I will see people lined up. So if you think I was the next one in the queue, know that that's not necessarily the way that I'm seeing it. So we'll get to as many people as we can, and we will have a coffee hour afterwards so that there'll be another opportunity in a more informal way to interact with Marianne. And one other thing that I would just like to suggest, if you put your cursor on your little video box, you will see a blue square with 3 dots in it in the upper right-hand corner. If you click on that, one of the options that will come up says, it's at the bottom, it says rename. It would be helpful to me if you would go down there and rename yourself if the name that is in your video now is the name of your church or just your last name, whatever you would like me to address you as, if you would go down to the rename option and put that name in, that would be helpful, because I've had times where I've had to say, well, Trinity Church, would you have something you'd like to say? Because that's the name that I see when I look at your video. So we'll get to that point after we've had an opportunity to hear Marianne and Jack's conversation. So thanks, Marianne.
Yeah. And just as a quick aside, when Brandon Scott was our guest, he had just B. Bran, I think.
Yes.
At one point, and so it's like, well, I'm going to call on B. Bran, not sure who that was, and my gosh, it was Brandon. So anyway, nice suggestion to put your name in there so we can address you.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So it is my honor today to welcome back to Second Saturday Conversation, Jack Caputo. And by the way, if you want to Google him, Google John D. Caputo. Jack Caputo won't take you where you need to go. John D. Caputo. Jack has been helping me, and actually is helping us reflect on matters of ultimate concern. It's a phrase from Tillich. And I recently said to a friend of mine that I'm not sure that I am a good or an accurate student of Jack's. I will say that I was not Marcus's best or most accurate student, which ended up being an embarrassment for both of us from time to time. So I'm not sure that I am Jack's best student, but I will tell you that whatever I think is going on in the work of Jack Caputo has influenced me a lot and has shaped me a lot. And whether it's Jack's insights or my meandering mind, he will know. He knows the difference. But I am so pleased that he's with us today. And to borrow from a few words that Rilke used to describe himself, I have wondered if Jack is a falcon or a storm or a great song. Another way to introduce Jack this morning, I am going to read a prayer that was given at the establishment of an archive of Jack's work at Duquesne University. His work is archived and alcoved at the Silverman Phenomenology Center at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. This happened in April. And a prayer was given in honor of Jack and as a way of welcoming people to the establishment of this archive. And the words of this prayer, I think, are so in keeping with Jack's spirit. Jack, by the way, quoted Leonard Cohen in his own presentation and his paper at Duquesne on that occasion. And he quoted Cohen as saying, there is a blaze of light in every word. I love that. There is a blaze of light in every word. I would say there is a blaze of light in every word of this poem. So as a way to introduce Jack Caputo, God beyond all imagining, we are minded through the dedication of this archive of the human quest for the sacred ever dancing in our imagination and seeking expression in meager words, words ever falling short of the infinite mystery we seek to engage. We thank you for the life work of Professor John D. Caputo, a philosopher and theologian. We recall with gratitude his many places of learning and entrust to your care his students and colleagues in the universities of Fordham, St. Joseph, Villanova, Syracuse, and yes, Duquesne in the fall of 1978. Professor Caputo's striving to join sacred text with human experience has given forth a rich resource and powerful stimulation for all who engage in his work. May this archive be the means for that work to continue through the scholarship of all who draw on it in future years as a resource for their thinking and dreaming and praying. May the work now housed in this archive continue its work of discerning the Spirit's unfolding in human history through scholarly endeavor and open discourse, listening always to the Spirit speaking in each age through human experience. May the blessing of God bring abundant insight and renewed energy for scholarly pursuit. Amen. Jack, welcome. Did that prayer sound familiar?
It was, you sit through these ceremonies, been sitting through them all my life, and they're usually very perfunctory. And the opening remarks are usually very perfunctory in the opening prayer. And that one was a home run. I mean, he just nailed what I was trying to do.
I could hear the crack of the bat.
Yeah, I mean, he got all the wood on it. And that's I was very touched by that. How did you get that? Did you write to him and get it from him?
I asked Jeff for it. Not our Jeff, at Duquesne.
Jeff McCarry. So he has it.
Yes. So I'll send it to you because I now have a copy of it. If you'd like one, I'd love to send it to you. Jeff McCurry, the same.
I'm going to plagiarize it.
Yeah. Well, I thought no better, more actually eloquent, blazing words of light to introduce you than that prayer. So we're going to spend the next half hour plus. I'm going to give you some sort of prompts for conversation, and just so that our gathering of folks here know, I've given Jack complete permission to just take the steering wheel and take this conversation wherever he would like to go. I have actually been in a car with Jack, so I know that he is perfectly capable of managing all kinds of roads and turns and this and that behind the wheel. But I would caution pedestrians. But I have given Jack permission to just take this where he wants. But Jack, I want to start by asking you two questions that actually I've asked of all of the Second Saturday guests this year. Okay, so these are Second Saturday questions. So we'll just, we'll start with those and move from there. The first Second Saturday question I've asked of all of our guests this year is, what do you make of Christianity in and for the 21st century? I mean, that's a huge question, but what do you make of Christianity in and for the 21st century, since that's sort of the umbrella under which we gather and talk about? And let me just note that I know that you have a new book coming out entitled What to Believe. It won't be out until August. And by the way, for folks here, I'm going to do a book study on that. But anyway, what to believe, which is a question that you are getting at all the time. I don't know if that's an angle for you to address. What do you make of Christianity in and for the 21st century? So that's the first Second Saturday question. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words. I mean, I have nothing profound to say about Christianity in the 21st century that you have not heard many times before, and that is that it is increasingly polarized, and there's no such thing as Christianity. There is this multiplication of Christianities, and they're just moving in opposite direction. I mean, there are the God, guns, and Trump Christians, and then there are the people who take Jesus seriously. I mean, there are Christianity is becoming, on the one hand, reactionary, anti-scientific, anti-modern, anti-learning. It's devolving into a culture of nativists and nationalists and militarists who think that Jesus was a sponsor of the Second Amendment. And that's gets most of the press. And I don't. And if we took a poll, I don't know if they might even outnumber the rest of us. And then then there are the Christians the peace and justice, Martin Luther King, Christians that who have a prophetic spirit, let justice will flow like water across the land. Christianity of peace and mercy and compassion, to this welcoming the stranger, not building a wall to keep them out. And that polarization is increasing. It's waxing, not waning. And if it continues, I think it will just Christianity will just break up. In my own tradition, in the Catholic tradition, Pope Francis is trying to hold the thing together. And that, as a friend of mine who was a very distinguished Anglican theologian said, when they're going through the same thing, and he said, it's a question of putting unity before truth. Trying to hold the thing together so that it doesn't just break apart means compromising what it stands for, what it really is about. So I don't know how that is going to end. I don't think it will end well. I think Christianity is making itself unbelievable. So what to believe, the title, what to believe, is question mark, by the way. You got to keep the question mark in that. Otherwise, it sounds like a pronouncement from the Vatican.
Or from Caputo.
It's a question, not a categorical imperative. What Christianity is making itself more and more and more unbelievable. And whether there's anything we can still believe about it remains to be seen. I mean, I can see it just devolving into an anti-scientific subculture and just losing its mission.
Yeah.
I can see that happening. I fear for the future of it. And the other thing that would be, apart from that, I mean, I think there's another philosophical, theological question underway. That is, if I were a young graduate student, this is really what I would be working on. I think that the information technologies are transforming things in a very profound way. And so one of the things that I mean when I talk about specters is the virtual realities, the spectral relationship that we've got here, which has all kinds of wonderful advantages, but which is also very dangerous. We're undergoing, I think, a real sea change in our understanding of reality, in which the classical distinctions upon which religion and philosophy theology and philosophy have depended are eroding. The
Mm.
distinction between the material and the immaterial, living and non-living, human and non-human, those distinctions are breaking down because it's becoming, it appears to be the case, that these are basically different versions of different kinds of information systems.
Mm.
And what we call human intelligence is actually just a very fertile and creative information system. It's an information system which is capable of producing unforeseen effects. And it just may be that we will we are evolving towards something which already calls itself post-human.
Hmm.
In which case, I mean, and they're not kidding about that. That's not a metaphor. That's not an expression, a turn of phrase. That they mean that quite literally, because insofar as a human being has a biological body, they mean to get past that. So then you would have, from the point of view of classical theology, beings who were not born of Adam and Eve, even metaphorically, and don't need to be saved by Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Um, so something is coming, which is astonishing, terrifying, marvelous, dangerous, profoundly reshaping the world. I think the introduction of computer technologies is changing the world in a very profound way. It's not just a new technology, it's a new understanding of reality.
Uh-huh. Mm.
And Christianity needs to be ready for that. And there are some theologians who are working on it. I've been in Specters of God, in that chapter on angels. This is really interesting, right? There's a very, very, very interesting analogy between angelic intelligence as it is conceived in the Middle Ages and artificial intelligence. So you got medieval AI, angelic intelligence, and artificial intelligence. And in a certain sense, artificial intelligence is realizing what the medievals were dreaming of with angelic intelligence. I actually wrote my master's thesis on Thomas Aquinas's theory of angelic intelligence. I may not believe that, but that's actually true. And
Now, you've had a thing about angels, if I remember correctly.
I did. I had angel envy, and I mean, supremely intelligent live forever. Always united to God. I mean, what's not to envy? Right? It was also the key to understanding Aquinas's metaphysics, by the way. Anyway, so you could say the event that was going on when the medievals were dreaming of angels, which is how they thought they were communicating with angels, by the way. And what's going on now? It's in both cases, they're trying to transcend our biological limitations. Oh, death, where is thy sting? And oh, death, where is thy victory? Well, we're going to beat it. So now, I have a colleague at Villanova University, a woman named Ilia Delio, who is a Franciscan nun and quite a hot number. I mean, she's just really quite a terrific, progressive theologian, and I think she scares her colleagues. I mean, she's really out there, and she's working on this, and she's approaching it from the point of view of Teilhard de Chardin. Well, that kind of theologian, like Ilia, and there are others doing this, I think are the theologians to come. So I think if Christianity is going to make it, it's going to have to come to grips with the revolution in the information technologies, which is a whole nother topic.
Okay, interesting.
That's if it survives Donald Trump.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, really interesting. I thank you for that. Well, the second Saturday question that I ask, and this is language that I get from you, so the image is from you. If you would, if there has been an experience, there's probably been more than one, but an experience that, and here's the language that I've used in asking the question, that shattered your horizon of expectation. Okay. And something that, I've had a number of them on various different levels that just sort of made me sort of rethink, recalibrate, re-examine what I think is going on, or redirect me in some way. So if there's an experience that you'd like to share that shattered your horizon of expectation and has made an impact on you, I'd love to have you do that.
Okay. Well, as you say, there are lots of turning points in your life. There are lots of things that happen.
Right.
But let me just pick one that really was quite decisive.
Okay, I'd love it.
I grew up in a very blue collar neighborhood. It was I grew up in Southwest Philadelphia, not far from where I live now. Actually, we live in the western suburbs of Philadelphia. Villanova is just outside of Philadelphia. And it was densely packed neighborhoods, row houses. We call them townhouses now, but they were row houses, densely packed. So the parish I grew up in was St. Barnabas Parish, was probably no more than 12 square blocks. But in those 12 square blocks, there were thousands of people. I mean, they were and we were all blue collar people. We were the children and grandchildren of immigrants, mostly Irish, but a lot of Italians and then a scattering of other Euro-American Catholics. And my parents never went to high school. They didn't get as far as high school. They were, fifth, sixth grade, something like that. And they were undereducated. And, there's bad grammar, and there wasn't a book in the house. And I never read anything when I was going through grade school. I mean, I was surrounded by priests and nuns, and I was sort of scared of them, and I did what I was told.
You used to do that, huh?
And in the summertime we played baseball, and when it was too hot to play baseball, we went up on the porches in these row houses and played cards. We played poker and pinochle. And that was my level of culture. And I honestly had never read a thing other than what I was told to do in school. I had never read a book, and there were no books in the house. And my mother and father never encouraged me to read any books. They didn't read any books. And so then I survived grade school because the nuns, we were, that was a matter of survival. I mean, some of them were quite sweet, but some of them were tough. So then I went to high school. And when I went to high school, I ran into the De La Salle brothers, who were very different, very different. They called us by our first name. You made reference to John D versus Jack Caputo when you Google the name. Well, everybody who knows me calls me Jack, right? And the nuns call me John. And so there's a difference. The difference between Jack and John is actually quite profound for me. And so the brothers called me Jack, and they were just, they knew about baseball, and they were decent. They were nice guys. And most of them, some of them were grouchy and sour, but most of them were lovely people, and I liked them. And so in my sophomore year, I was still Jack Caputo from Southwest Philadelphia. I still hadn't done anything more than I was supposed to be doing in school. And I thought, well, I'm going to try out for the track team. And I was very mediocre. I loved baseball, but I was mediocre at baseball. I was terrible at basketball, but I loved sports. I just wasn't very good at it. And so, well, maybe I could be a track player. I could run. Maybe I could run. I didn't think I could run cross country, so I joined the track team. I didn't think I could last a mile, and I didn't think I had that kind of endurance. I wasn't fast, so I didn't want to do a 100-yard sprint. So maybe what I'll do is run the half mile. I'll train for the half mile. That sounds about right. So first meet comes along, and this was a home meet at our home high school, and I'm in the half mile, And I finished, if I wasn't last, I was next to last, or I was next to last out of 50 guys. And I staggered off the track. I mean, all out of breath, and it felt so good. And I remember leaning up against the side of the high school building, and I threw up. I just threw up.
Yeah.
Just, blah. And I was thinking to myself, you know what? It is probably easier to write about this stuff than it is to do it. And so the next day, I went up to the third floor to room 314 and joined the school newspaper, the West Catholic High School News, the West Catholic News, West Philadelphia Catholic High School News, West Catholic News. And I met this guy, this brother named Brother Paul, and he took an interest in me, and he said you probably could be a good writer. He said, but we got to fix your grammar. Because I spoke like my parents did. I was still not exactly like them, because I had gone through grade school, and now I was in high school. So, but I still had some of the, screwing up past participles and stuff like that. But he said to me, I think you could be a good writer, and I want you to start reading. Oh, reading, that's interesting. And he said to me, I want you to start reading a guy named Red Smith. This was a brilliant move, completely brilliant move. Red Smith was a sports writer, but he was if they give out Red Smith sports writing awards now. He was a beautiful writer. He was a magnificent writer. And Brother Paul said to me, he said, read Red Smith for style. I said, what that mean? What do you mean read him for style? What do you mean talking about style? And he explained to me what style was. And we would look at these things together, and then he gave me a list of books to read over the summer. And he said, when you run into a word, and I had, the only kind of books I had read, if I had read anything at that point, would have been like not war novels or something like that, paperback pulp fiction books. But he gave me some good books to read, and he said, whenever you hit a word that you understand, underline, look it up. And he said, read them for style. And that was my sophomore year. I came back my junior year, and I started writing, and he made me an associate editor of the newspaper. And I really got into the newspaper. And then in my senior year, I became the editor of the newspaper. And we were working together because we would come in on Saturdays. Writing a newspaper is a lot of work, so we would even have to work on Saturdays. And he would bring in music. He'd brought in. He'd be bringing show music. He loved show music. He brought it one time. He brought in My Fair Lady. And My Fair Lady was, in those days, this was the 50s, right?
Right.
A sensation. And I started listening to that. And the other thing I knew was rock and roll. I still like rock and roll, but that's all I knew at that point. And I fell in love with that.
Wow.
And then he started talking to me about literature, and the whole world, a world that I did not know existed, just opened. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be Brother Paul. And I joined the order, and I went through a very profound and transforming experience in which I came to discover philosophy and theology. And I discovered my vocation. It was not to be a brother, because they wanted me to stay and teach high school English, and I said no, I want to teach philosophy in the college, because they ran a college. And they said, well, the vow of obedience doesn't work like that. You don't tell us what you want to do, we tell you what you're going to do. And I said, well, no. I said, I love you guys, but I have found what I want to do, and it's philosophy. And I left and got my PhD, and it all went back to throwing up on the schoolyard. It all began with a barf. In the beginning was the barf, and my world changed
Yeah.
totally.
That was your canonic experience, huh?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I love it. If you ever write an autobiography, I think that you just got your title. You know, it all began with a barf.
That's a true story.
I think it's great. Yes, so that changed your horizon of expectation for sure.
Shattered my horizon of expectation completely.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Um, Thank you for that. And I appreciate your sharing some of that autobiography. I appreciate it. There's, you know, you're a man of profound intellect and flesh and bones too. So love it.
I've told that story, but I don't think I've ever put it in the published it in the like this now. So now it's
Yeah.
recorded. They're taking it back.
You know, just like, you know, I think you should use Father Bill's prayer that he offered for you and at Duquesne. I think you should repeat this barf story too. It's great. So moving right along, I want to ask you a little bit about we've been using this quote, and I was exposed to it through you, about the rose is without why. It blooms simply because it blooms. It pays no attention to itself, asks not whether it is seen. The rose without why has really had a huge effect on me. And it actually, I think, is helping me to live better. And I think it will help me die better. So there is something about the wisdom of that, that without why, that even if things don't turn out quite the way we either want or expect, or to say it even more harshly, even if it turns out badly, that we were part of this blaze of light, you know. And my understanding is that poem reflects axiology. Have I got that right? The what matters to us, what we value, what we think matters most. Okay, and I'd love to have you reflect a little bit on the importance of that mystic rose, maybe the cosmic rose as well, without why.
Yeah.
The so what question, because my sense is that without why, it may not be the hermeneutical key, but I think it's pretty damn close. But I'd love to have you speak to this, because I think that axiology and that phrase of Angela Salesius, that's his pen name, is really important, and really important in your own work. So respond to that a little bit. Tell me
Yeah,
if I got that
it
right.
goes back to the 13th century and early 14th century German mystical tradition, what's called the Rhineland mystics. We thought it went back to Meister Eckhart, who was the most famous of those mystics, but we actually discovered that it went back to a woman named Marguerite Porete. And Meister Eckhart got it because he was asked to examine her work because she was being tried for heresy. And he himself ended up getting in trouble later on. But he found it in a book that she wrote called The Simple Soul. And by simple, she meant divested of worldly accoutrements and worldly desires, and in particular the selfish, narcissistic desire. And she said that love is without why, and then that the simplicity of the soul was to love without why, to love without an expectation of return. Love not as transaction and not as a form of self-gratification, but of self-giving.
Mm.
And Meister Eckhart picked it up, and he made it a central theme in his own mystical sermons. And then it was versified by a man named Angelus Silesius, which was Silesian angel. That was a pen name. His name was Johann Scheffler. He was a 17th century poet and priest, poet, theologian, who versified it in a thing called the cherubic angel, cherubic wanderer, searcher, the one searching for divine joy, which is found in love. So the idea of love is an investment we make without the expectation of return. So it's not, it's the opposite of it is economics. In economics, we want to make a good investment because we're willing to give something up so long as we're getting something back. But love is not a matter of economics. It is an investment, an expenditure without reserve, an expenditure made unconditionally, an expenditure which we make even if it's at our own cost. Now, in the Middle Ages, this took a very interesting form. Marguerite Pret and Meister Eckhart both got into trouble because they looked like they were raising us up above virtue itself, because they were saying we must be so selfless and we must let God be God. God desires nothing more of you than that you let God be God in you, that you go out of your ego life and let God be God in you. And so it even made it look like, and she said it, she was bold enough to say, adieu, she was a French writer, adieu to virtue, goodbye to virtue, because I am so free of my own desires and willings that I let God be God of me. So she's getting certainly out of trouble. But one of the things that came up was this: what about the heavenly banquet? What about the return, the heavenly, the reward, the heavenly reward, the economy of salvation?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Meister Eckhart and Marguerite both said that our love must be so pure, so without why, so free from self-interest, that where it's God's will that I be sent to hell, then if that's what God's love demands, then I would willingly go to hell rather than experience a heavenly reward, because love must be that pure. So it was a hypothesis, right? God would not actually do that, right? But it was a kind of a mystical hypothesis. Could love be that pure?
Right.
Well, this thing made its way through the history of German mysticism. It was picked up by Luther, and it got into German idealism, and it finally made its way into Heidegger. Mm-hmm. So Heidegger wrote a book called Der Satz vom Grund, the principle of sufficient reason. Principle of reason. Everything has a reason. So he starts out by quoting the philosopher. The philosopher says everything must have a reason. And Heidegger says, but the mystical poet says the rose is without why. It has no reason. It asks not for itself. It cares not for itself. It blossoms because it blossoms. Mm-hmm. And Heidegger said, well, the poet's not saying that there aren't biological causes for the roses, that they don't need soil and nourishment and sun and moisture. He's not saying that. He's saying, and he's not saying, well, the rose is stupid, it doesn't have intelligence, it can't ask questions. He's saying, the poet is saying, we should live like the rose without why. That is to say, with a disinterested love of, now Eckhart said, God. Mm-hmm. And Heidegger said, Heidegger had grown up Catholic, and he knew that's how he learned about Meister Eckhart when he was a young Catholic. But he had since moved past that and had moved into a kind of meditative thinking, which had turned his attention to what he called the worlding of the world,
Mhm.
the Weltet, the world worlds, the worlding of the process of the world, and by that he meant he was very much like the English romantic and German romantic poets, the natural world. He had a cabin in the Black Forest, and so his idea was he takes God out of the equation, and he substitutes for it our mortal life in this world, and the movement of the seasons, the movement of from youth to maturity to death, our movement under the sun, upon the earth, before the gods, but the gods were worldly, poetic powers, not. They were Greek divinities actually. He was using poetry of Hölderlin. So he for Heidegger, this becomes the principle of savoring something for itself, in itself. So there must be something that we're doing for itself, not because there's something in it for us.
Okay.
It is something, he said, axiological, but when he said axiological, he said, I don't mean geometry. I'm not talking about geometric axioms. I mean the Greek sense of axios, which is something worthy of honor and dignity and respect in itself and for itself, not for something. So it's very close to what Tillich would call a matter of ultimate concern, something to which we dedicate ourselves unconditionally,
Right.
or which we're willing to put ourselves in harm's way.
Right.
It's also, I think you could say, you could use the word sacred. It's something sacred as opposed to profane. In the profane world, nothing's sacred. Everything has a price, right? Everything is, you're willing to put it on the table and negotiate about it. The sacred is, there's no negotiating. The sacred is the unconditional. The unconditional is the axiological. The axiological is what is love for itself without why. And what this got these guys in trouble, right? Because they were undermining. Well, they weren't guys. Marguerite Pret. These mystics got in trouble because they were undermining the power of the church.
Right.
I mean, the ultimate power of the church is the salvation. The key to salvation is the church, and salvation is surviving death and going to heaven, heavenly reward. I know people, good people. They're the salt of the earth people, old Catholic friends, who will say, well, look, if there's no heaven, why bother? Why, why? And that's, I mean, these are very good people.
Right.
That's a very cynical attitude towards to have towards things. I like to make use of, I have a heretical reading of Matthew 25. And the part of it that Matthew 25 I love is when they say, Lord, when do we see you hungry and give you to eat, and thirsty and give you to drink, and naked? That's the part I love. They've got no idea that that this was the Lord. They fed the hungry because the hungry were hungry, and they clothed the naked because naked were naked. They fed visited in prison because the prisoners were in prison. Period. Without why. Unconditionally. Period. But then this magnificent parable of living without why, of doing something because of its unconditional worth. Period. It's inserted in the story of the coming of the Son of Man, who's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And it becomes a story of terror. Love me and I will reward you beyond all get out.
Right.
Love me not, and you will rue the day you were born.
Right.
Love. That's terror. So Matthew takes this magnificent parable. I hope that he found it somewhere and then screwed it up. I mean,
Right.
I hope this thing was floating through the tradition and he took it and then inserted it within. He was tradition says he was a tax collector, right? Yeah, he was an economist.
Yeah, that's how he thought.
I mean, once you can't unring that bell. Once you say there's a reward beyond all understanding for this, and a punishment beyond all. I mean, suppose you went to the next wedding you went to, the couple, but exchange vows like that. Love me, and I will reward you for all, beyond your all measure. Love me not, and you'll be sorry the day you ever laid eyes on me.
Mhm.
They would empty the church. The priest would walk off the altar. I mean, that's not love.
Yeah. Is
That's,
it fair to say that Jesus, my understanding of Jesus anyway, is love without why?
yeah, but I think that he had. I mean, it is. I'm not a New Testament scholar, but I actually do think he thought in terms of demons, and uh, uh, he that seemed to be. I think. I mean, you have to ask Brendan this, but
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I do think that he himself actually probably did think into. I mean, he was in the Pharisaic tradition, so he thought that there was a resurrection.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
the
that's
thing is this:
the
why do you
question is
have to
what do
have a
we mean by
resurrection?
that? Mhm.
Why can't the resurrection just, if you're going to have one, resurrect the good and let the punishment of the evil be that they're just dead forever? Why do you have to resurrect them and then torture them forever? That's that's sort of sick.
Do
But
you think
but
we're
it's clear
human
that
beings? Do you think
the
we're
message of the
right?
it's clear that the message of the Sermon on the Mount and of his teachings about peace and mercy and compassion are the kingdom. The kingdom. That's what the kingdom is not a reward for these
Right,
doing
right,
these things. It is these things.
right, right. It's not based on the kind of economy that we tend to fashion.
The economy of salvation. We
Yeah,
talk about it as an
yeah.
economy of salvation.
So there's something about your talking about uh, that there's something about our understanding of limit and mortality and all that that just underscores how precious whatever this is, and that to have been here at all um, is gift, full stop. But I think that's a different way that most of us think about our lives and plan our lives. But it seems to me that like the rose, without why, that might save us.
Yeah, I mean, I think first for one thing, I think it's a tendency of progressive theology in this starting in the 20th century. Where with when Bonhoeffer talks about the religionless Christianity, and God wants us to stand on our own 2 feet, and God's not going to come riding over the hill and save us.
Mm,
And when Tillich speaks about God as the unconditional ground of being, and Bultmann tells us to demythologize.
mm,
When we read the scriptures, that could be taken in by the Copernican mythology. And there was a Catholic theologian named Yves Congar who had
mm,
a notion of laicite.
mm,
He was a Dominican priest, but he was an advocate of the role of lay people in the church. But one of the things he was saying, but what he meant by laicite, or what the French call laicite, secularity, was saving the world from being swamped by God, so that it's all about God, and it's all about another life. He wanted to save the integrity of this world.
right.
As a friend of mine, I did a lot of work with a Villanova Augustine priest. He says, God doesn't make junk.
Mhm, mhm.
And the world is intrinsically precious. And I think
Right.
and I think the language of after, I mean, I think the language of afterlife and resurrection and eternity, are all the classical language, is first of all largely Neoplatonic and
Mm,
therefore pagan.
mm,
Um, And it's symbolic. I think it's symbolic language. It's talking about something of unconditional import,
Right.
but it's not. It doesn't hold literal truth. What I think what we're saying is that the, life and world are to be loved in and for themselves, despite their mortality, and not despite their mortality, but actually in virtue of their mortality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you think about it, if you were genuinely immortal, so you really were. Suppose these posthumanists succeed, you wouldn't be able to put yourself at risk, right? Love involves putting yourself at risk, making yourself vulnerable.
Mm.
But if you have a genuine notion of literal immortality, then you would never be able to put yourself at risk. Love is vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Love is intensified by mortality. It's not undermined by mortality.
Mm.
And what interests me these days is what the physicists are saying about just this past week. Some of you, I sent this to you, Miriam, and some of you may have seen it a couple of days ago in the New York Times. There was a piece about a theory which is pretty well received among the physicists, that the universe is just expanding into oblivion, and over trillions upon trillions of years, countless years, there will be nothing at all. There will be no life, no light, no heat, no energy. Things will just be spent. And then this life of ours and this planet of ours, that puts this life of ours, this planet of ours, in perspective, right? This the Carl Sagan thing, if you don't know it, Google it, about this
Blue dot.
little dot, little fragment of dust. It's a picture taken by Voyager 2 that from it was at the time 4 million miles away from the Earth, and now I think it's like 14 million. Taken back and looking back at the universe from there, and in that picture, the Earth is a tiny little speck of dust, and mote of dust, he says. And Carl Sagan says, all the people that have ever lived, all the heroes and all the villains, all the good people and all the evil people, all the mothers and fathers and children, everybody you've ever known, whoever have ever lived or ever will live, there, that tiny little. He says, doesn't that make the folly of our cruelty to one another even more palpable? And the preciousness of this moment. So, yeah, I do want to say that life is a gift. Yeah. I think it's a piece of cosmic serendipity that we want to savor for itself. And I think one of the ways in which we've managed to do that, one of the ways we've found to say that, to express that gratitude for the gift, is the language of God.
Okay.
The language of God. It's not representational language, but poetic language, not the language of logic, theologic, but the language of theopoetics, where from the depths of our heart and the depths of our imagination, we have come up with a way of saying, blessed be this world, this life, and how monstrous it is to defile it and degrade it, and to live lives that are unworthy of it and of ourselves. I mean, this word axios means worthy, so we want to make ourselves worthy of the things that are happening to us.
Yeah.
Not unworthy. And what's happening in our world right now is that we are, we have made shamelessness acceptable. People are shamelessly hateful, and they're proud of it. So we are leading more and more lives that are unworthy of ourselves, and profaning this sacred mote of dust in the cosmos.
I want to make sure that some of the folks that are attending that they can ask you some questions. I'll tell you where I was going to ask a couple of additional questions, and maybe some folks will want to pick these up. So I'm not asking you to address this, but Jack, I was going to ask you to speak to us a little bit about theopoetics and event. Talk about, and especially event for dummies, like, because that is such an important understanding, I think, of your work. And I was going to ask you a little bit about Specters of God. What are the takeaways? Because that's your most recent book. It's not going to be your last. But what are some takeaways that you want us to have from Specters of God? And I was kind of curious to know, why did you write that now? You give a lot of due to Schelling and sort of reintegrate some things. But so that was on my mind. And then the other thing that I was going to ask you, and this was a more personal question, was what do you want your children and grandchildren to know about life? And you may have just addressed that in the way that you talked about sort of the preciousness and the wonder of this gift, come what may, without a why. But so, I could talk with you forever, but I'm going to open this up now to other folks who might have a question that might be related to theopoetics or event or Specters of God or whatever, or they may have something else that's on their mind. So I want to make sure that they have at least some chance, and then they'll have about 20 minutes to prompt you. Okay. So Jeff, can you, and I'm not going to read the guidelines. I just want us to be, it would be great if you have, I tend to not know what I'm going to say until I've said it. It would be really helpful if, when you're asking a question of Jack, if you have an idea of really what it is you want to ask him. Okay. Because we don't have that much time. I'd love to hear as many people interacting with Jack as possible. So Jeff, help us out here.
Great. I see that Fred Crowley has raised his hand. Fred. And I'll just say real quickly that because of the shortness of time that we have, if you can keep your comment to a minute, that would be really helpful. So thank you, Fred.
Oh, thank you very much. I've watched all the episodes for the last few years, and I want to say thank you very much for this. It's a special thing here. I read some of his books. I live down here in Wilmington, Delaware, not too far from Villanova, so I'm pretty close there. Usually on Saturday mornings, I play golf, but today it's raining, so I get to watch it live instead of on tape. So that's pretty exciting for me, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you that I think we're in this spiraling down time, and everything's kind of spiraling down, right? And you're seeing all the institutions leak and all the trouble in society. But I also believe that there's a spiraling up coming here a little bit, right? And I see it in the stuff that you're doing, Mary Ann. I see it in the work that you're trying to do, Dr. Caputo. I see it in some other things like the Center of Action and Contemplation, some of the guest speakers you brought on the program through the years, right? I see it, in our church right now. We have a very church, and I see us trying to do something there in our community, right? On the board of the Friendship House, we work with the homeless people in Wilmington. I see stuff happening there. Right? So I see a lot of people out there right now trying to turn this thing around a little bit, right? So I believe there's a circle going up. And I have young kids, they're 21 years old. So I'd love to see this go the other way. But I think things do change. I think we're in the middle of that time now. And I see science coming together with religion and spirituality and psychology. And I think a lot of things, I think there's unlimited possibilities, right? So I think we need to embrace that and try to take our consciousness to a higher level, right? And try to embrace a higher level of consciousness and see where this goes. The only thing I'll say is, as a Christian, Jesus went out in that desert for 40 days, right? And I think he filled his heart with divine love. Then he came out and he showed you what it's like to be somebody who's full of divine love. He set that example. And then the institutions took over for a couple thousand years, right? So I think if we go back to that, I think that divine love's in each of us. I think, being a Christian's in each of us. I think we just need to embrace that and try to see where that leads us and just bring this consciousness to a higher level. So thanks for letting me share my comments. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing to try to keep this movement going.
Yeah. And you're part of the hopefulness of it also.
You're right. You're quite right. The way I usually put this is if you ask me Mary Ann's question, it depends on what day you ask me. Whether I sound more like you or I sound like more down, more upbeat or downbeat. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think, for example, the religious right is the most contemptible element in our society. I think the secular right is they have the religious right has no excuse, no excuse. I mean, they've read the New Testament. On the other hand, I think that the secular left is snotty and elitist and sort of calculating. My favorite people in the world are the religious left. You know, the people who are the sort of the Martin Luther King, Berrigan Brothers, Dorothy Day, radical Christian left. They're the people who've got a vocabulary for what they're talking about, who have a heart and a passion and a poetics.
Yeah.
That is the problem with the secular left is it doesn't have a poetics. It's got a rational account. It's you know, it can say to people, you're voting against your own interests, your economic interests, and that's right. But there's a theopoetics in the religious left that is where my heart is, and that my oldest and best friends are. That's where they are, and that's because there's a religious tradition there. There's a religion which is not to be confused with an institution, but with this memory and promise of the figure of Jesus.
Thank you. And I don't think this dualistic polarization thing is going to work. You know, I think it's eventually going to lead to violence or blow up or something. So it's got to be replaced with something. And I think the comments you made are online where it needs to go. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And Jack, one of the things that you've given me is, you know, Marcus gave me a lot of background in New Testament, biblical studies, Jesus. His clarity is just so helpful. And I love what you just said about theopoetics, that it gives us additional language to try to talk about actually what's at stake here. And so I just think that's a really important, I mean, theopoetics might sound like kind of an elitist term for people, but I don't think it is. I think we need to rescue it from any kind of elitist framework. But so I so appreciate your understanding and work to help us in our imagination and in our imagining the importance of theopoetic language. And I think that might help to lead us out of some of this more literalistic, hard-hearted, soulless stuff that is being bantered about today. So
when you talk about the soul of the nation, you know, we're losing the soul of the nation. That's a theopoetic image. I mean, you don't mean an immaterial substance there.
Right.
You mean a sense of compassion and mercy and kindness and justice and equality, which is spectral, right? You know, it's not a being somewhere. It's going to do something, but it's an inspiration spirit.
And is that some of what you're pointing at with the language of specters of God?
Yeah, because because I don't think that there's
Specters
some
of God,
ontological
imagination, apophatic imagination. It's like all of that is so evocative, but I think that it takes us into another level of understanding and communication that I think is liberating, as well as expansive.
Yeah, you get below the level of propositions and beliefs and true and false, and you get down to matters of the heart.
Right. You know, and for all of your intellectual,
theopoetics is the language of the heart.
I think that for all of your for all of your intellectual brilliance, I think that your work ultimately is about matters of the heart.
St. Augustine, beginning of the Confessions, the cor inquietum. I always quote the first half of what he said, not the second half. He says, "Inquietum est cor nostrum." Our hearts are restless, and that I think is the
just fancied it up in the Latin. So appreciate that.
That's the defining characteristic of the human condition. the restlessness of our hearts. What I don't quote is the rest of it. Do not requiesce cotton tag until we rest in thee. You mean when we're dead and we're in heaven. Well,
We want to be
have that part.
restless.
I would
And
rather
our
be
restlessness
restless.
is a sign of our vitality and our mortality.
Right.
Yeah.
I would rather be restlessly alive than resting in peace.
I love you guys. Keep it going now, all right? Keep it going.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes. Well, Jack, I'm counting on your restless heart. Continuing to be restless.
So
So Jim Mock has his hand raised. Jim?
Hi there. Maybe a way to think about this is from John Lennon, of all people.
We got Leonard Cohen. We can have John
That's
Lennon.
right. That's right.
Jack
Imagine
Caputo.
it's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there are no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. If I find my place here. And no religion, too. Imagine all the people living in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man and women, I would say. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. Amen.
Mm.
I mean, it's amazing how these songs. Leonard Cohen is usually my choice, but it's amazing how these people just nail these things. They just nail it.
Yes, thank
Perfect.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
There's a comment that just came up in the chat from
Yes.
Philomena, and I wonder, Philomena, if you'd like to share that. You can unmute yourself. Yeah, I don't know. I'll read to you what she has. She says she doesn't have a mic. She says, can Jack tell us who or what he's reading that makes him say we are moving to a post-human world? Is it particular philosophers, scientists, books other than Elia Dalio?
Yeah, if you in the last chapter of Spectres of God, in the footnotes, I give elaborate documentation of the literature on this stuff. There's a vast literature goes under the name of posthumanism, sometimes transhumanism, and it's stuff that I'm simply passing along. I am by no means doing this kind of work. I mean, you need to know a very great deal of mathematics to understand what is going on here. But there are, and you'll see them in if you just look at the footnotes, you'll see all kinds of people. But like, there's a guy named Nick Bostrom, Bostrom, who is one of the leading theorists. He's an Oxford philosopher, and he's one of the leading philosophical theorists. I mean, he knows the mathematics, and he's also a philosopher. And he talks about things like, there is some kind of mathematical probability. I mean, the latest calculation is a 30% probability that we are basically a simulated unit living in a simulated universe, and run by a super intelligence somewhere. Now, why it's not 25% or 35%, it's 30%, but that's the kind of thing that completely serious Oxford professors, serious people, are talking about. There's a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who was actually swallowing a lot of vitamin pills because he wants to live into his 90s, because he thinks that by around 2045 or so, we're going to hit what he calls the singularity, at which point we'll be able to upload consciousness onto a computer and not live forever, because the universe is going to live forever, but live indefinitely. And there's an explosion of information on this thing. Many people writing about it, and you can get a pretty good list of them from whatever that chapter is, chapter 12 or whatever, at the end of Spectres.
So
But Kurzweil is very famous. Bostrom is very famous. A bunch of people.
yeah, Jack, in terms of matters of the heart, all of this stuff about AI and the fact that, you know what, maybe the universe is going to dissipate in time. So what?
Yeah.
How is that helping us? Speak to me about, in a sense, the without a why, without why. Speak.
Yeah, I mean,
so what, how is this going to help us living in the matters of heart and soul, which is really where we are in the midst of all of this uncertainty?
yeah, I mean, right. That's the right question. First of all, you want to make a distinction between a problem and a mystery. A problem is a problem. A problem is something that can be solved, that you can see the way in which it would be solved, and it's bothering. First of all, it's bothering us, and second of all, there needs to be some way to solve it. So, climate change is a problem. It's not a mystery. It's a problem.
And I would say that God is a mystery not to be solved, but pardon me.
God is a mystery, not a problem. So,
Right.
so this question of the ultimate end of the universe is a mystery, not a problem, right? It's we're zooming out, taking an ultimate, the widest possible perspective on our lives, and it doesn't affect our day-to-day life. It's absurdly remote. But it is a matter of ultimate. It's an ultimate matter, not a proximate matter. It's a question of what, literally, in heaven's name, is going on.
Okay.
Man, what is going on? And it's pretty likely that that's what's going on. I mean, that's the best hypothesis that physicists. I mean, there's people who don't agree with this, obviously. And tomorrow morning, everything's liable to change, but this is a very dominant, widespread, widely received hypothesis. And what it does in terms for me is to intensify the preciousness of this moment, so that the question without why, or the notion of the living without why, is the answer to the question so what. The so what is, this life is itself has its own intrinsic depth and richness and value, and our investment in it is unconditional. And so what is a way of saying that life, that we should live without why. We should live with a sense of the intrinsic dignity of our own lives and of our neighbors and of this earth, which we need to take care of.
And without why does not mean without affirmation.
No, it's the purest form of affirmation, because it's an affirmation. It's an unconditional affirmation.
Right.
It doesn't mean who nothing matters. It
Right.
means that something matters unconditionally. It's of unconditional import, unconditional depth, and we are.
And see, that's my biggest takeaway from your work.
Well, you got it.
All right.
and
I
I want to say that the language of religion is a symbolic way to put that out, to express it.
Yeah.
It's a profoundly powerful symbolism, and it's also, because it's profoundly powerful, it's profoundly dangerous, because it makes people crazy.
Right. Right. Yes. We have maybe time for another, and it's getting close to a 11 o'clock. And I have a brief close. I want to say a little something about the closing music that I've chosen for today. I think you'll recognize it, Jack. And then we will go into a sort of a coffee time. And for those of you who can stay, and if you haven't had a chance to ask Jack a question, maybe we can take that into coffee time. So Jeff, maybe we can take another one or two if they're somewhat brief.
Yeah, let's take Michael Barnes. Michael.
Great, thank you.
Jack, having just read Folly of God a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of yours, I guess, David Gulston, did a study on it last Sunday.
And by the way, David Gulston is at West Star. Jack has been part of the West Star Institute, so highly recommend them. Back to you.
And also, David Gulston also runs a Quest Institute out of Hamilton, Canada. Anyways, I'm intrigued by the term. Being a person who is probably an anti-omni descriptor of God, I was interested in your comment in it, the weakness of God. And I was wondering if you could talk a little on God's weakness.
Lovely. Thank you.
Well, first of all, what you mean by the weakness of God is not an unqualified endorsement of weakness and spinelessness. It's actually a way to intensify our sense of responsibility and our need to be strong, because I think the name of God is not the name of a supreme being. It is, in my view, I think there are all kinds of reasons for saying that. But just to summarize what I think, I don't think the name of God is the name of supreme being. I think that's a personification. I think personifications are fine so long as you understand the personifications. It's the name of what I like to say that what interests me is the event that is contained in that name, which is the event of a call, which calls us to. And I think that one very interesting way to condense the whole thing is the possibility of the impossible. It's a frequent description of God in the scriptures. It's the possibility of the impossible. Let's say the possibility of something horizon shattering, something that will renew the earth, renew our lives, renew the world. But it is not a being that's going to do that for you. It is a focus imaginarius in which everything that we pray and weep and dream of is concentrated, which and it is not just a fiction, an imaginary whimsy that we've come up with. It's born out of the depths of human experience, and in it we've invested everything that we love. But it is like in this Jewish version of the Messiah that Walter Benjamin has. He says, if you're interested in the Messiah, you should understand we are the messianic generation. We are the ones that the dead have been waiting for. So the name of God is the name of a call to which we should be the response. We must become part of the history of God. So God is not an omnipotent being. God is the name of a call for the possibility of the impossible, a powerful one. It's not a subjective projection. It is the expression of visceral desire that means everything to us. So it's profoundly important, which is also why it's profoundly dangerous. So the weakness of God means that. And it also means when you look at the particular image of God that you have in the Christian tradition, he's the complete, which is Jesus. You get the complete inversion of power. Mm-hmm. Forgive. Hatred is met with responded to with love. Sin is met with forgiveness. The outsiders are in. The insiders are out. The world is turned upside down. Lay down your sword. When you're the response to the enemy is to lay down your sword. Turn the other cheek. You have this Alice in Wonderland, upside down world in which the kiss is more powerful than the sword.
Right.
That's the image of God that you get in the New Testament. If Jesus is going to be your icon, right? Jesus is the icon. A Christian is someone whose idea of God is filtered through Jesus. Jesus is the icon in which God is imaged. And and what's the life of Jesus? The life of Jesus is compassion, mercy, forgiveness, love, not hate, like that. So it's what in the political order you call soft power. What's in the soft power of the United States is not its army or its military. It's the model it's supposed to provide of decency and equality and justice and freedom and opportunity. That's its real power is its soft power. And that's what's being destroyed right now.
Agreed.
Our soft power.
And that soft power is like, do this in remembrance of me.
Yes.
Do this in remembrance of me. And I love, Jack, how you put it, that to talk about the weakness of God, that God is not going to come in and clean up the mess, as Dom Crossan might say.
Yeah, I'm trying to get all the plastic bottles out of the water.
Right.
Yeah.
And the responsibility is upon us.
Right.
That's what Bonhoeffer was saying, but he didn't. Bonhoeffer was still an Orthodox theologian, but I think his intuition was in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, we're coming to understand what theopoetics doesn't mean ornamenting a pre-established truth.
Right.
It means that poetry is the only language we have available to say this, and it's a creative, constitutive poetics. It's not an ornament.
Yeah.
And so the figure of Jesus in the New Testament is this. Then the kingdom of God in the New Testament is a poem, and Jesus is the poet. And what you call Christianity is we turn Jesus into the poem, and then we build an institution around it. But in the New Testament, if you ask Jesus, and Brendan is great about this. If you ask Jesus what do you mean, what he means by God, he says, "Well, have you ever seen a mustard seed?" That's and that image that we get of God is not of strength and power and force, not God, guns, and Trump.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. We will, for those who can stay for coffee time, we'll continue this. There's never enough time to unfold what Jack exposes for us. I just really appreciate your presence with us, Jack. I want to say something about the closing music that I've chosen for today. I'm chosen Leonard Cohen, since you quote him, and you actually quoted from this very song at the end of your talk at Duquesne for the establishment of your archive and alcove. It's Leonard Cohen's Alleluia. And I am having the music that I chose is Katie Lang singing it. I actually prefer Katie Lang singing it to Leonard Cohen singing it. And Leonard Cohen writes in this song, Alleluia, but listen, love. Love is not some kind of victory march. It's a very broken Alleluia. And then Jack, toward the end of his paper at Duquesne, quoted Leonard Cohen, and even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but Alleluia. So come what may, I hope that we are ones that there's nothing on our tongue at the end but Alleluia. And I think Jack and his work helps us to get there. Jack, is there any closing word you'd like to give us before we move to the closing music? And then we'll see folks in 5 minutes at coffee time.
Yeah, you stole my closing line. That was.
Did I
That's,
really?
that's how I get out of these things. I always end with something like that. Yeah. World without why, amen.
And even so, even if it's a broken hallelujah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to describe prayer. I think a broken hallelujah. It's a wounded word. The theologian Jean-Louis Chrétien describes it as a wounded word, and it's very similar to what Cohen has intuited with broken hallelujah.
Right. But it's an hallelujah nonetheless.
Right.
Yeah. Jack, thank you. Thank you. You're such a gift to us, and you are a man for our time. And even though you suggest that perhaps Catherine Keller is the most important American theologian today, I would say it's Jack Caputo. Thank you so much for being with us. I will see some of you next Saturday for our final Third Saturday Reflection small group opportunity. I hope to see others of you on June 10th, our next Second Saturday conversation. And those who can stay, I'll see you in 5 minutes after Katie Lang sings us through with Alleluia.